Hi everyone and welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Gladys.
I'm Rath Wang.
So recently, as mass protests erupt across China from worldwide discontent over Xi Jinping's stringent zero-COVID policy, we will explore what this means for the future of the Chinese Communist Party and what appears to a loosening of this policy, and of course the implication for nearby Taiwan and the region. Today joining us in the studio we have Wu'er Kaixi, who's known as the former student leader in the 1989 Tiananmen student democracy movement, and now he's a Taiwan citizen who served as General Secretary of the Taiwan Parliamentary Human Rights Commission. And today we are also inviting Raymond Sung, who's the Deputy CEO of the think tank Taiwan New Constitution Foundation, an expert in Taiwan's and the region's geopolitics. Welcome both to the studio.
Thank you for having us.
I spoke earlier to Wang Dan, Director of Dialogue China, longtime exiled political activist who sought asylum in the United States after years of imprisonment by the Chinese Communist Party. He spoke to me about his 8 points of advice that he drew from his experience as one of the leaders of the 1989 Tiananmen student democracy movement in Beijing that led to the massacre of thousands of protesters. Before we go into our discussion, let's first take a look at China's new recently released 10 measures, largely seen as a compromise to the mass protests and its first step in relaxing its zero-COVID policy. For the first time in years, asymptomatic and mild patients are allowed to isolate at home, with patients no longer being required to isolate at designated centers. Also, PCR certificates are no longer required for interprovincial movement. As travel restrictions are lifted, businesses no longer have to be shut down. Schools, cafeterias, and gyms can also operate as usual. My first question goes to you, Wu'er Kaixi. This relaxation seems to be a breakthrough in Xi's COVID policy since it came to effect about 2020. And can this be seen as a success of the A4 revolution?
Well, yes, of course. It's rather than to say it's a breakthrough, I'm seeing it as a great leap backward. So basically, after 3 years of this one-man policy that no matter what you call it, zero COVID, or there are different terms, but basically 3 years later they realize it was wrong. So they have to go through a different approach. And then I think the timing of the A4 revolution, we call it, has come into the time. The quick response suggests that they have already contemplated of changing this policy. Chinese is a totalitarian regime. They don't do quick response. So what happened, if it appears to be a quick response, most likely it's coincident. So I think they have been contemplating about relaxation of the policy that's not working well for China. At the time, so-called A4 revolution erupt, and then maybe then they just thought, okay, let's go ahead and with the change that we have already
You're saying they're
planned.
looking for a spark in order to make this happen?
I think they were going to do that one way or another, but just this revolution gave them another reason to do it. I don't think it's an excuse or anything. What I'm saying is they probably have already planned to announce this with or without this A4 revolution.
So you don't feel this is a testament to the people speaking up and the government actually bowing to that pressure?
No, I don't think so. They don't do that. And then actually, when I saw this, I actually worried they may not implement this change because of the movement. Okay. So they don't show that they are surrendering to the people's challenge. But if the policy, but they also don't do that because that means quick response. They don't do quick responses. So that's if we understand the Communist Party well, they're not democracy. They don't do quick responses. They don't gather and have a discussion to have a, let's say, a well-rounded idea or response. They never do that. So when I see this, I think it's important to urge the media, don't read into it too much. Okay. This is coincident. They have already decided the 3 years of COVID policy didn't work. I mean, it hurts the economy tremendously. And then also, I'm pretty sure someone has suggested that this is adding fuel to the nationwide dissatisfaction.
So would you say it actually give them a way out?
Well, I think, again, this is a coincidence.
Right.
And then I think somebody probably suggested, you know what, if we announce it today as we planned,
Right.
it will serve also the benefit of easing the challenges.
Right,
So
right.
I don't think it was triggered by the A4 revolution. It just happened they were going to do that anyway. And then the A4 revolution was another reason for them to go ahead and announce this change.
Okay, so Raymond, what do you believe this is behind President Xi's willingness to make such a compromises?
I think what Kaixi just said was very, very interesting. I think the ease or the mitigation measures now imposed is merely a symptom of a more serious defects,
Right.
which is a governmental failure. In any event, if you think about that, how could such harsh so-called zero COVID measures and all kind of isolation around it can be imposed on billions of people and families and causing so many humanitarian tragedies, and only by a way of one man, which is representative. It's a symptom. It's a symptom much more serious about the regime, about what the CPP rule is about. It's about a totalitarian regime. It's about the one man's rule, and without no public health justification or any reasonable cause or reasons, because there are so many alternatives. For example, to be more really raise the vaccination rate, or to have medicine, or have a more effective vaccines to be imported to China. There are so many alternatives, but the CPP's ruling parties just ignore all that. And it also represents the governmental failure, because you have to go through all that kind of hardship to have some kind of mitigation measure to be imposed and eased, and which is meaning that the government is not really listening to the people, but it's only care about the maintenance of its iron fist and the maintenance of the CPP rules, which represents...
CCP, by the way.
CCP, I'm so sorry.
Yes, I know
But
them
they did give in, though. In the end, they did give in, and with these 10 measures that they came up with.
Well, if you look really carefully about the mitigation measures, it's a tacit admission that the previous measures are a failure. Yeah. Because you see, it's not effective. It's being concerns being raised all over the world, saying that you don't have to do this. It affects your economy. It's not good for your own people. It's not good for your own economy, and there's no public health reason to do that. And so they follow the advice only now. And those concerns have been raised years ago. And also the lockdown. The lockdown measures has also been criticized, heavily criticized back to 2003, when there's SARS epidemic. And the lockdowns are widely viewed as unnecessary and ineffective, and there are so many other ways to get around those pandemics issues. Right. So I think the cause is go to the root cause of how the Communist Party of China is about.
Okay, so speaking of A4 revolution, Wu'er Kaixi, when you closely examine the revolution, would you even have this mind thinking that it would get out of control to some point? Have you ever
out of control?
Have you ever thought
That's a very
that would
interesting choice of words.
Right?
No, I am a protester in origin. That I never thought in 1989 that our movement grow into the nationwide level should be described as out of control, out of Communist Party's control, out of regime's control. It was never really out of control for the country, and certainly was not out of control by the organizers, us. So I don't think this time the movement is coming to a nationwide, well-organized, coordinated movement just immediately. I don't see that, but there is a possibility. The movement always have its own life, have its own legs. We often say that it can walk the square. This movement, from closely monitoring it, and I see it demonstrates a very strong dissatisfaction among people. That's for sure. So when you hear the slogans, it's not just about the COVID. And then a lot of people were shouting 表达自由, freedom of expression.
Yeah.
So freedom of expression is one of the most fundamental element of democracy. So these slogans, and then also like there are slogans like down with the communists, removing, and then asking Xi Jinping to resign, or down with Xi Jinping. Those slogans, I think we can categorize them as emotional outlet. So they are like it was more to express the dissatisfaction rather than putting forward a concrete demand.
Yeah.
But that means the dissatisfaction is there. It's very strong, and then it's very political too. So if a movement that you can see around the country, they have come out with very synchronized, spontaneous, yet at the same time synchronized slogans, then you know the drive between those people taking the street, having the protest is there. It's very present,
it's
very
not
strong.
just happened within the young generation, actually. So I guess that's the main difference.
Well, the young generation, the international media have been monitoring this and then making a comparison to say, is this one of the movement after 1989?
Right,
the reason they made this comparison, of course, has something to do with that political slogan, but also has something to do with campus. Young people in the campuses. There was many of them actually started holding the white A4 paper. That have given people a shock because it hasn't been seen for many years, 33 years since Tiananmen. But I want to point out the phenomena that the Chinese have invented this term called 群体事件.
Like a group event?
Yes, event of
Right.
of a mass or event of a group of people. So it's kind of a funny term. But when they also documented more than 10,000 of those 群体事件 every year since 1989. But why this one have attracted the attention of the world is because of those events were rarely political. They often raise questions about corruptions. They often challenge the economic policies. Many have something to do with the bank policy for freezing the deposit or the unfinished real estate development, things like that.
Well, this one's like purely political.
But this one is you can see the force behind it in a way. We can see the drive. It's the dissatisfaction is clear, and then it's pointing to CCP. By the way.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go back.
Party.
I want to go back to Gladys's comment in terms of swinging out of control. And like you said, this one is political, and we haven't seen this in many years or even decades. But if it does go out of control,
just not on the surface,
in this scale.
Right.
But if it does go out of control, do you feel that there will be ramifications on Taiwan? And will Xi Jinping try to divert that attention to distract and come back to Taiwan?
I still don't like the term out of control.
We can use a different term.
Control, yes.
But if it grows into a large scale.
Okay.
We actually make it a good point, that control. Under whose control?
Exactly.
Right.
So if the Communist Party feels that this is getting out of their control,
do you think they'll divert and distract to Taiwan?
They may try, but I don't see. It will be a double-edged sword for the Communist Party themselves too, because once they try to divert people's attention to the cross-strait relation, that means they have to deliver some kind of substantial actions, which they are not ready at this point. China, I keep saying China shout out so loud about Taiwan because they can, because it's not like a democratic country. If Taiwan government shout out something, they have to follow through that. But China, as a totalitarian regime, They have been shouting about Taiwan for 7 decades now?
There's no accountability. They say whatever they want.
Exactly. There's no accountability for them saying that. And then also just by saying that, it serves the purpose of raising the patriotic sense from those 50 centers or what we call little pinks. It can become a strong supporting force for the government. And that's what they need. They don't. For them, actually reunifying Taiwan is one thing, but shouting out about it is another. And then shouting out about it served the purpose already. So they may shout out, but it's going to be a double-edged sword, as I said, because this time, when people are so angry, when people were trying to having a direct challenge of the government, and then you want to divert us to something, better have some follow up with that new diversion. And then when Communist Party is not ready to deliver that following up actions, I don't think they will easily resource from that action.
So Raymond, we wanted to ask you, what do you think, from your perspective, observing pinkies, and do you feel that the drums of war are actually
especially for international perspective, this time people pay attention to
Of course,
this
Taiwan is in a delicate position, and everything happens in China carries a risk for Taiwan's security and implications, which we must watch very closely. That's natural. And one thing we witness is not to a certain scale that could threaten or bring some instabilities to the Chinese Communist Party's rule, which is unfortunate. And of course, we have to watch very closely about what are the directions that Chinese politics are developing. And I must say that I endorse what Wu'er Kaixi just said. And I think this A4 protest is at a very, very early stage, because it's on a single issue. It's about how people are treated. If you are taking back and look at it, COVID, an epidemic, doesn't bring to the result that a government can impose such harsh measures to restrict personal freedom and movement freedom or speech, which is unbearable. And on that single issue, the Chinese people protest, but not further. There are some voices to say that we have noticed the governmental failure, systematic failures. We have to change this government or how the government is run. And unless that is achieved, and the people's, the measures will come back on other causes. There's no systematic resolution to that. Unless you have a democratic movement, you have a movement to overthrow this Communist Party regime. You have to have a reform. And so in that perspective, it's very, very early stage. Of course, we hope that the torch started by the Wu'er Kaixi in 1989, democratic movement, and Liu Xiaobo's constitutional reform, political reform can be carried out, that Chinese nation can be reformed into a democratic nation, which is to the benefit of the Chinese people and to the world. But until that happened, and we will witness the recurring, no matter under Xi or under Jiang Zemin, the recurring of the authoritarian rule, of the harsh treatment, inhumane treatment of Chinese people.
So you're saying the direction is there, but there's resentment, but there's no clear direction on how to make this happen.
Of course, there are some guidance.
Yes.
Started far.
But it's still very early in that stage.
You have to have other conditions to be met. You have to have organizations.
I think the direction is there.
Okay.
The direction is there, but from where we are to the direction where the direction points us, there are some uncertainties at this point, and then it's way too early to project, to say what will happen next. This wave may retreat. Maybe
we'll talk more about that in the next section. And
certainly.
Yeah. So
Okay.
We just discussed the implications of the A4 revolution and how this has impacted China's several year-long draconian zero-COVID policy. Let's now hear from Wang Dan, Director of Dialogue China. Wang is a longtime exiled political activist who sought asylum in the United States after years of imprisonment by the Communist Party of China. He shares his 8 points on how to sustain the A4 revolution in continuing to push for reform of the Communist Party from within. Let's take a look. When you saw the A4 revolution, Wang Dan, you immediately put forward an 8-point statement. Based on Xi Jinping's character, what do you think, or do you think he will brutally enforce it by force?
I think he will try to calm the situation first, probably make some adjustment regarding COVID policy. But if his policy change fail to calm things down, I believe he will resort to further violent repression. I think there's still possibility of sending army to crack down the protest.
What do you think is key to success in this movement, in addition to the simple, easy to understand, consistent slogan that you mentioned from "Don't stand alone and be united"? Does this movement require an individual to lead this?
The key to the success of this revolution is for more people to come forward. So I suggest they adopt so-called be water strategy. No need to have an organization or a leader, but they have to call more and more supporters to go to street. That's very crucial.
Wang Dan, do you believe that this erupted because of the discontent of the Chinese people? The Chinese people feel that they have enough. And in doing so, will the US take diplomatic action as the US is in the midst of fierce competition with China?
I urge the US should issue a statement as soon as possible, warning the Chinese government against the use of force, which is very important to protect the protesters. Other than that, I actually do not think there's much more the US can do on this matter.
As Wang Dan just explained to Rath, there is a real chance for this leaderless movement to continue and bring about change within China. So, Wu'er Kaixi, would you agree with what he says?
Yes, I would, totally. And then this movement has already achieved one very important fact in China that has ignited the people's courage.
Right.
Chinese communist regime have been trying to maintain the stability or sustain in the power by mainly through two measurements. One is implementing fear.
Right.
That started from 1989, Junfo's massacre, a full-fledged massacre using real ammunition and tanks, standing armies invading its own capital to basically establish fear. Deng Xiaoping actually at that time said, let's kill, by killing 200,000, we can get 20 years of stability. Shameless prophecy, but unfortunately, it also came true. Because
and now that it's been 20 years, do you feel
33 years, actually. So it's a sad fact. I mean, China has been ruled by Communist Party by its fear. China have a very strong presence of a police force, riot force, armed police on the street all the time, just to remind people the tight control and the violence nature of that control the Communist Party possess against its own people. That's one of the measures that the Communist Party used to sustain their ruling. The other is economic growth. Since 1992, by the way, from 1989 to 1992, in contrary to most people's memory, China's economy went backward. So everybody remember China is like 40 years of economic growth. Within those 40 years, there was 3 years economic stopped. Actually went backward. But from 1992, the economy picked up again because Deng Xiaoping, after his famous tour to the south, announced a brevier reform. What is the brevier reform? Is basically acknowledging or yielding to what we have demanded 3 years ago in 1989 in Tiananmen Square. That we have put forward many demands. Two of them are economic related. One is market economy. The other is acknowledgement of private property rights. Deng Xiaoping, after 1992, basically yielded into that and then urged the Chinese Communist Party regime basically struck a deal. I often use this narrative. The deal is like, and then it's a lousy deal, which is using Chinese people's political freedom to exchange for Chinese people's economic freedom. We are entitled to both of those freedoms, and then the Chinese Communist Party made a swap and made us to swallow the deal that we will give you some opportunities to make money, your life will be better. In exchange, leave the politics to us. Forget about freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, forget about democracy. One party ruling, but you'll be well fed. So that's the deal. And then that deal, I think, have pushed China in the last 33 years forward without political challenges from people. But now, when the fear is no longer, fear doesn't pass through generations. The memory of Tiananmen 33 years ago has been fading out. And then, but the urge for freedom is deeply enrooted in our DNA.
And also for the internet spread of the videos
and then the younger generations may not be as patriotic as our generations were, but they are very individualist, like with all the self-posting on the internet and things like that. So, but that is also a strong force for the younger generation to fight for their freedom. That's why 表达自由, freedom of expression, become a very important slogan.
Are you saying the party is actually responding to this generation's what they want, or
they sense the challenge? Are they responding? Okay. They are trying to divert their attention. They want to ease that tension. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. But are they going to answer for the demand of freedom of expression? I doubt it.
Right.
But when I say this movement, by this point, have already had some certain achievement, I mean it have ignited people's desire for that freedom of expression, and then they realize they are not all that powerless. They can take the street. Okay. If the Communist Party does not deploy, again, like what happened in 1989 for a bloody massacre, the people will be encouraged by their own courage. Okay. So, again, fear doesn't pass through generations. DNA, freedom is in our DNA, and courage is also contagious.
So hence these 10 measures, do you see it as a compromise for the young people of China?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's a coincidence. It wasn't.
You think it's a pure coincidence?
Yeah, it wasn't designed to answer or to yield.
It would be too optimistic to say that, right? That's why
the Communist Party. Exactly. I don't think Communist
So do you foresee bloodshed, or do you foresee some kind of military action against the people?
Well, too early to say that.
But if this movement goes on, that could happen.
No, there are many different elements that dictate whether that's going to happen or not. Mm-hmm. One of the most important elements is how the world is going to accept or not of the Chinese Communist Party's massacre again. So in 1989, the world did basically cut the slack for the Chinese Communist Party and say, okay, you killed people, that's bad, but we're going to keep doing business with you. So that is a policy I describe as appeasement. And that appeasement has been stopping in the last 2-3 years, including here in Taiwan when we received Madam Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Mm-hmm. It's a clear indication of United States-led Western democracies changing its China policy. Appeasement no more. So when in today's world, Chinese Communist Party facing the decision, how are they going to meet the challenge of the people? Was massacre one of the options or not? When they think about this question, they better check the facial expression of Joe Biden.
Although they did respond with the blockade, I wanted to move to Raymond. You mentioned in a previous article, episode with us that it was mind-boggling how Hu Jintao was escorted out of the National Congress, and it was a complete show of total control by Xi Jinping. Do you feel if the U.S. comes strong or democratic allies do come to Taiwan's support, do you feel that China could back down, given how Xi is pushing forward with this power campaign?
Well, that's really a very remote possibility, because I think the key now is domestically what will happen to Xi Jinping's rule of China next. And because I'll carry from what Wu'er Kaixi just said, there's some elements of this ruling under Xi Jinping, mainly by fear, imposing fear and imposing force upon its own people. It's upon its own people and emanating through outside world, including Taiwan.
Although it's young people might be saying enough is enough, and they seem to be resisting.
Well, it's just scratching the surface because that's how we are treated. You know, they are asking that please treat us humanly. That please give us back some kind of freedom. Now, I know you have to impose some control over the pandemic, but please give us some basic needs. That's really beginning. If you think about that, the legitimacy of the Communist Party's rule of China rests upon that it will deliver prosperity, economic welfare to its own people, and to have the people to have their voice, to give back power to the people. But any of this has been fulfilled by the Communist Party.
I wanted to mention one other interesting development that we've seen. Yeah.
Please.
We've seen with the death of the Chinese president, Jiang Zemin. And there was this huge funeral, but there are also critics who've said that half of the funeral was about Xi Jinping. He talked about his policies, which is seen widely as disrespectful, but also in terms of scale, it was huge, it was unprecedented. How would you see, I'll throw this question to both of you.
In a tightly controlled society like China today, you have to have some events or have some symbols to express your dissent or dissatisfaction. And the death of Jiang Zemin or memorial of the Jiang Zemin might be one, but it's also very remotely possible because the Communist Party is on tight control over this arrangement of those events. For example, Jiang Zemin was said to represent an open era, or an era where the Chinese economy is developing very fastly, or the growth of the GDP was very fast. But none of this was true. Okay.
Although we did see, the strait crisis with Bill Clinton and all that was also during Jiang Zemin.
Well, you have to look beyond the surface. I think we have been repeated time and time again to not just look at the surface, but please look more deeply about this. The show. Jiang Zemin was a showman, okay? Jiang Zemin, everything he did, representing an open-minded to a Western society, speaking some English, but all those are appearances, are show. And the show put in 1996, when President Clinton was visiting China, was also a show. The crowd, although the direct broadcast was allowed, but the crowd was heavily selected, strictly selected. And all those are the show. You have to understand that. And the wealth, economic welfare, well, you have to see this crony capitalism under Jiang Zemin. There's not really a distribution issues being solved. It's not the welfare of the people being achieved, but only those who are close to Jiang Zemin was wealthy. And now, under Xi Jinping, they've been one by one, they've been ripped, the wealth being ripped. So you see how the Communist Party of China is governing China. It's a reckless, it's a unchecked power. It's overbroad measures, no matter on human dignities, on freedom of expression, on economic wealth, or carrying risk of military invasion to South China Sea nations or Taiwan. It's totally, from the inside to outside, it's a totally corrupt system. It's an unstable force of the nation. If you can do such kind of thing to your own people, imagine what kind of thing this kind of regime can do to other people in the world.
But just to sum up, this has been a really busy 2 months for Communist Party, I would say, from last November until now, the December. Wu'er Kaixi, would you see this is a sign for further consolidation for Xi's power after we saw the Jiang's funeral? He tried to make his policies well heard. What's your opinion?
Oh, I mean, it's a very good question. This is definitely a period of time that Xi Jinping is trying to consolidate his power. It started, of course, way before the party's Congress, 20th Congress. It started from Beidaihe, or even before that. But it will be completed after the March People's Congress coming in the March 2023. So another 3-4 months from now to complete his power consolidation. And then we just saw on that video clip in the Jiang Zemin's funeral, right? The flower boutique sent by the flower ring that have been sent by the leaders, right? We see the one next to Xi Jinping's is Li Keqiang. It's been purged out from the power. And then from that is Li Zhanshu, who is also no longer staying in the political bureau. And then Wang Yang, all these people, but those people, although they have been purged out of this power consolidation, their flower ring is there. They are still on the surface until the end of the two Congress, People's Congress, and then the Political Consultation Congress in the coming March, until the end of that. Those people are still somewhat. Now, even if it is only on the facade, they are still within the ring of power. They could actually take advantage of this challenges of the people or the failure of the COVID to make their last attempt in this struggle. And then when I noticed a lot of Western media described Jiang Zemin's funeral or how Xi Jinping treated Jiang Zemin's funeral as a high profile. Well, there are two different ways of describing.
It seems like you disagree.
I don't think it's a high profile, actually. Okay. Well, China haven't really had a state funeral for 20-some years since Deng Xiaoping. And then Jiang Zemin hold the title of the country's chief. Country's leader. Of course, when he died, and then he couldn't choose his own death date, and then of course there will be a funeral with a huge portrait put on the stage. That portrait doesn't mean Xi Jinping wants to hold the same high profile. He wants this Jiang Zemin's death things go as quickly as possible. And then and as low profile as possible. When I say low profile, I really don't mean the size of the portrait. Let's say if he reduced the portrait by half, that will be high profile because that will be a political statement. Okay. Now, what they're doing is just going through some ceremony that they have long planned, knowing that Jiang Zemin's death day is coming pretty soon. So. No, they are just carrying through.
Let's not forget there's also pressures from inside the party, right? It's not just for the mass to analyze how high or low the profile.
Hu Jintao's still alive.
Yeah, right. Well, exactly. So I'm pretty sure Xi Jinping at this point is so worried that, okay, let me go back. Let me use that term at this point. That things go out of control, but out of his control. So I'm pretty sure he's worried about that. He's worried that the movement erupt in the whole country into the level is no longer oppressible to come to the scale. Because Communist Party basically been telling Chinese people, we have the force to oppress if you try to challenge us.
Right.
For a long time, being a Chinese dissident, I have been saying they don't have enough prison cells to lock us all up. And then the Communist Party said, guess what? We can build one. So they put on the concentration camp in Xinjiang for Uyghur people to lock up more than 1 million people. And then the last 3 years of the COVID locked up is also a demonstration that the Communist Party have the total power and control over people. So it's implementing that fear. But still, under that kind of pressure, the A4 movement, the A4 revolution, still that erupt. So I'm pretty sure Xi Jinping at this time want this period to go through as quick as possible. He would so much hope that he wake up, it's already April.
Right.
But
everything's settled.
Yeah, from now until then, there are many different possibilities. And then people have tasted the sweetness of expressing themselves. And then they have tasted the sweetness that they can get away with it. Those police force, those armed police patrolling on the street, they are not necessarily going to use that. So one of the most important elements of this A4 movement is it has planted the seed of bravery, and that it is highly contagious, more than this COVID that we are living through.
We'll talk about this power to be reckoned in a bit. We just talked about what political unrest in China could mean for Taiwan and the dangers of China's one-man rule. Coming up next, we'll be discussing how Xi Jinping is coming out of over 2 years of self-isolation. Charged and traveling the world, Xi is on a campaign to shore up support from countries around the world, including many traditional U.S. allies.
So in this episode of Taiwan Talks, we have two experts on cross-strait and international relations. First, we invite Wu'er Kaixi, who's known as former student leader in the 1989 Tiananmen student democracy movement, and now he's a Taiwan citizen who served as General Secretary of the Taiwan Parliamentary Human Rights Commission. Also, we invite Raymond Sung, Deputy CEO of the think tank Taiwan New Constitution Foundation, to discuss the implications of Xi Jinping's renewed global campaign in courting world leaders. So, Wu'er Kaixi, we just talked about the new bureau. We have the 6 core members of the leaders of Communist Party until next March that we will confirm all the core members, I believe. But how do you see of these leaders from your point of view?
After 1989, Chinese Communist Party has adopted the system. It's one-party ruling. It's
right.
Totalitarian regime for sure. But at least it's not one-man dictatorship.
Okay.
There is a difference. They have always been, the Communist Party were so proud of this, what they call collective dictatorship. The dictators are like not one, but the Politburo, and then the standing Politburo members. But Xi Jinping have just made sure, and then the whole world, at least the whole country, know from the 20th party on, it's no longer going to be the case. It's one-man ruling. Yeah. And we don't know how long it's going to last. There is no limitations. Would he going to serve just three terms, or maybe even 4? We don't know that. And then that has a strong and then also, like what you said, the standing Politburo members were all people who are made of all peoples that have a strong background of Xi's fraction.
Yeah.
Such as the mayor of Shanghai.
Yes. All these people were like, you can see this is a personal entourage kind of a thing. So the political standing Politburo is going to be reduce its importance from now on. In the past, those are members of the standing Politburo members. They were actually also dictators. But then from now on, there's going to be only one. This one has, this move will have what kind of implication? Well, I think one of the most important thing is how Chinese people receive this. Do they like it? I mean, we can see from the slogans, and then even from a couple of months ago, before the 20th Party Congress, when we say in the Stone Bridge in Beijing, when there's this very brave man put out the slogan, was very pointy to Xi Jinping. And then also through this A4 revolution, we have been hearing a lot of slogans pointing to that. This failure of the COVID policy have also helped people to realize, and the failure of this policy is because of him. And so in Taiwan, I want to also bring this up. A lot of people in Taiwan, not a lot, some people in Taiwan have been giving a high praise for China's governance, that they decide to use this word. I mean, we have democracy, but they have strong governance. No, they don't. They have poor governance.
Right.
In our country, in democracy, we have problems because we are transparent. People can see those problems.
Okay.
In China, they cover it up. So there are even much more severe problems occurring every day, every hour in China, because Chinese Communist Party have a totalitarian regime, that they have poor governance. The Xi Jinping's one-person rule just consolidated his power, will make that poor governance even poorer.
So you feel the figures are actually distorted, say COVID figures, death figures, and all that?
Well, okay, let's see one of the figures. Death figures, I don't know yet, but let's say a refusal of using the Western vaccination. It's purely a political decision. That decision says we're going to use China's vaccination. We're going to be the great rejuvenation or something. I'm pretty sure that comes from Xi Jinping himself. We're not going to import any foreign because we have our own.
Okay.
That vaccination is not that good. The problem is with that vaccination, no matter what's the high coverage of it is, and China also don't have a high coverage of vaccination. So with that poor, limited coverage of bad vaccination, almost zero COVID is almost the only option left for the Communist Party, because otherwise the death toll, the pandemic eruption is going to be much bigger than what we see today.
Well, we've seen in Hong Kong under Chinese rule the same phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly.
Breakout and all
exactly. We're here in Taiwan. We should say, thank God we didn't have those Chinese vaccines, and then we waited for 1 month to get the Western vaccinations came in for us to have what we have today. And then thanks to democracy, for we have a governance that is much more efficient. And then when people have a dissatisfaction with the government's governance, although many people think, oh, this governance is pretty good. Taiwan's COVID policy was pretty successful. But when people are dissatisfied, we have another measure we call elections, is to punish the politicians.
And speaking of President Xi's schedule recently, we noticed that he visited Middle East. Actually, he just had the China-Arab Summit. So Raymond, how's your opinion towards that? That actually President Xi signed over 20 agreements with Middle Eastern countries. Is he aiming for some energy security there?
Yeah, I think China is developing its global strategies to strengthen its own power and grips of competitiveness against the United States and the Western world.
Yeah.
And of course, Middle East is a strategic region, and of course, getting close to Saudi Arabia, and it's a strategic move, and it's to the benefit of both parties that China needs energies, and the Saudi needs some balance against the worsening of the its relation with the United States. So getting China involved is a natural move for China. But may I remind that many people in the world have short memories, and we see the resurgence of international status of China and Xi Jinping himself after in this recent months, like